ਪਾਕ ਦੀਆਂ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਅੱਜ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਕੈਂਪੇਨ ਲਾਸਟ ਵਰਕਿੰਗ ਡੇ ਤੇ ਆ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਹੈ। ਮੰਡੇ ਨੂੰ ਅਕਤੂਬਰ 19 ਨੂੰ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਕਰਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਮਹਿਮਾਨ ਨਾਲ, ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਐਲਿਜ਼ਾਬeth ਮੇ ਨਾਲ। Elizabeth, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
So how is your campaign going so far? I know it's a long campaign. Are you enjoying it? And what end results you are expecting from this election?
Well, I am enjoying it, actually. I love being with people, and as a people person, there's nothing quite as much fun as constantly going from one community to another where people are happy to see you. So it's really nice. We've had some exciting tours. We've been in through Atlantic Canada, Ontario, and Quebec quite a lot, and also, of course, my home province of British Columbia. And I have to say, I'm very encouraged. I think Canadians are more engaged in this campaign. I think the advanced polls and the fact that so many Canadians showed up early to vote is a good sign, and I'm certainly hoping to see more Green members of Parliament after Monday.
Okay. Let's talk about Alberta Oil Sands. I was going through your platform and I read you want to keep oil sand in the ground and you want to build refinery here. So
yes.
Why will you want to keep oil sand in the ground? Oil create lots of job. I'm in Alberta and we already suffered a lot of job because of the oil price. So what are your plans about oil sands?
Well, what we've said is the same thing, actually, that the international scientific community says, as well as groups as diverse as the International Energy Agency and Canada's former bank governor, Mark Carney. He's now governor of the Bank of England, and referring to most of fossil fuel reserves in the world, and this is Mark Carney's words, as, quote, unburnable carbon, unquote. So when you start realizing that most of the fossil fuel reserves below the ground have to stay below the ground in order to ensure that we have a livable climate for ourselves, for our economy, for our kids. That means most of what we know of has to stay in the ground. That doesn't mean we're not continuing to produce some at the current levels of production in Alberta. The difference between the Green Party and the other parties is that we recognize that the oil sands have to stop growing. We're not saying the oil sands have to be shut down. We're saying the current levels of production would be acceptable if we produced the product from bitumen to some usable final products like gasoline, propane, and diesel, but did it in Alberta. That would shut down all these pointless pipeline debates, because every single pipeline is about taking the raw material in a rip and strip kind of economy, taking the bitumen and shipping it to other countries for refining, at the same time constantly growing the oil sands. That's a poor strategy economically, and it's a reckless strategy for the world's climate. So that's what we would do. We'll create more jobs even in Alberta, while at the same time working towards eliminating fossil fuels by further into mid-century. We need to work with the rest of the world for a change. Canada's been a holdout the last few years, and it's time for us to get back on board progress on climate action.
Okay, you want to build refinery, but if you look at it, building refinery means investing $10-20 billion initially. And if you look at the stats, Canada didn't build any refinery since 1984. USA built last refinery in 1976. What do you think in this time building refinery, what will we accomplish?
Well, we need to sit down with all the provinces, and frankly, Canada's federal government has stayed out of federal provincial conversations for a long time, including on healthcare, including on education. But when we have a national energy plan, which we don't have right now, Alberta will play a critical role. For Alberta to play a critical role, we need to think about how to generate jobs in Alberta while at the same time reducing the expansion of the oil sands. The way to do that is to process bitumen in Alberta, not ship it out to other countries. Frankly, it's a problem when Canada's refinery capacity keeps dropping. We've lost most of the refineries we used to have, and it's time to build a more energy efficient and environmentally high quality state-of-the-art facility. And making sure that happens is something that we need to discuss with all levels of government and also with investors. But it makes sense to ensure that we have the jobs in Canada processing bitumen. If we're going to produce it here, we should be processing it here and using it here.
Okay, and how do you plan to create jobs in Alberta?
Well, the number one way is to make sure that we're not shipping out raw bitumen for jobs in other countries. So if you're upgrading bitumen, by the way, is a solid. It doesn't flow. It's not oil. So the way they want to put it in pipelines is to ship a toxic material up to northern Alberta, something they call diluent. It's a fossil fuel condensate that they ship in from Saudi Arabia. So they ship in the diluent, ship it up to northern Alberta, stir it in with the bitumen just to make it flow. This is not practical and it's not sensible, and it adds a lot of environmental risks just to get bitumen to other countries for jobs there. So the major unions in northern Alberta agree with the Green Party position that we need to have the jobs in taking bitumen, first upgrading it to synthetic crude, and then putting it into a refinery. We also create jobs right across Canada by moving to a more energy efficient economy, moving on climate, and frankly, the jobs in northern Alberta have always been somewhat exaggerated. Oil sands, before the dropping price of a barrel of oil, at their peak, oil sands contributed only 2% to our GDP. So let's keep a sensible approach. We're not saying we can afford to lose 2% of our GDP, but it's hardly the most important part of our economy. We already have more jobs created in what's called the clean technology sector than are created right now in northern Alberta. So we need to enhance that sector. We need to commercialize the new technologies, whether it's tidal power or more solar voltaic cells on our roofs, so that we get energy more cheaply and at the same time with less pollution.
Okay. If you talk about Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, he wants to run 3 state deficit. On other side, Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Harper wants to balance budget, next budget. What's your view on this?
Well, our full platform at greenparty.ca is also fully costed, and we've provided a detailed budget going out the next 4 years. Now, as it happens, the Green Party prefers balanced budgets, and our budget is balanced out the next 4 years. But I also have to say that in terms of the health of our economy, whether we run a small surplus or a small deficit is really quite a trivial, an accounting matter, really. What we want to do is know whether our economy is getting sufficient investments, whether we can kickstart our economy to avoid a deepening or worsening recession. To do that, we do need investments. The Green Party believes we'll get enough investment, not necessarily enough, but we'll get our economy kickstarted and we'll deal with the municipal infrastructure deficit by taking 1% of GDP, of our GST funds. That's not increasing GST, that's just saying of the GST funds collected, take 1 point of it, which is $6.4 billion, and on an annual basis, add that to the gas tax money so that we have money for our municipal governments to invest in improved public transit, improved waterworks, improved parks, recreation, and so on. Those will create jobs right away. Now, Justin Trudeau believes we need to put in more than $6.4 billion a year. In terms of the infrastructure deficit, he may be right, but the bottom line is we need to invest in this economy. It has been stagnant for too long, and our large corporate sector is not investing. So we would raise the taxes on the large corporate sector in Canada. Large corporations, under our plan, would be paying 19% on their profits. Currently, they're paying 15%. But only in the year 2000, they were paying 28%. So at 19% is a reasonable increase, going back to what it was in 2009. That brings in $7.4 billion into our revenue stream for the things we believe Canadians want, like a pharmacare plan to bring down the price of prescription drugs, like better investments in our healthcare system, like helping our students avoid crushing levels of student debt. So we have a very practical program. I don't particularly take sides on an ideological basis on deficit or no deficit. It's clearly better to live within your means and not have a deficit. But debt is a much bigger issue. And Stephen Harper, in his 9 years as Prime Minister, has increased our federal debt to the highest level it's ever been. It's now over $615 billion. And of that debt at the federal level, Stephen Harper has added 24%. That's a pretty astonishing figure. And debt is a bigger economic issue than whether you have a small deficit or a small surplus.
Okay. What's your view on TPP?
We're opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, primarily because it includes what's called an investor-state agreement, which will allow the additional countries joining that trade bloc to bring lawsuits. Now, they're not really lawsuits because they're private arbitrations, but to bring cases against Canada for damages. And I think it's important, by the way, to keep a context on the TPP. I think it's being oversold by Ed Fast and Stephen Harper when they say, look, this is a $28.5 trillion market. That's a very impressive figure, $28.5 trillion. But to give it some context, the NAFTA trade bloc and existing trade deals that we already have in the region are more than $20 trillion. So yes, $8.5 trillion isn't trivial, but it's hardly a $28.5 trillion new market for Canada. The vast bulk of that market we already have through NAFTA. This deal adds as trading partners Chile, Peru, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, Brunei, and the biggest new market in this deal is Japan. But Japan gets the better of Canada in terms of undercutting our auto sector. So it's not clear. No one's read the full text yet. I've had briefings from the Privy Council office, but it is not at all the kind of winner deal that creates jobs in Canada as it's currently being oversold in an election while the text is being kept secret.
Conservative Party invited Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Mulcair to give a brief on TPP. Were you invited too?
Yes, I was. There was a briefing on the morning the deal was done, so Monday morning, October 5th. We were all invited to that briefing. I was the only leader to show up, but the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc Québécois sent some staffers to go over the briefing. They basically just told us at that briefing what it was they were about to announce, but it gave me the chance to ask some questions to confirm that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement includes the right of all those new countries to bring cases against Canada, to charge us in arbitration cases if they don't like the laws we pass here. There's additional briefing taking place this morning, and due to my schedule of traveling back to British Columbia imminently, I'm not able to participate in that briefing. But I have sent my senior policy staff, and we'll find out as much as we can, although they're not going to be reviewing the full text with my policy analysts. I will be asking the Privy Council office for the permission to share as many details as I can with Canadians. I think that's my obligation as a party leader and as a member of Parliament to learn as much as I can, while at the same time protesting the very notion that a government in the midst of an election should proceed to negotiate without sharing details with the opposition party leaders.
What's your immigration policy?
We believe that Canada benefits enormously historically and currently from immigration. Myself, I'm an immigrant. My parents moved to Nova Scotia when I was a teenager from the US, but immigration brings a lot to Canada, and new Canadians are an essential part of the fabric of this country. I'm very concerned about the changes Mr. Harper made to our immigration policy. The removal of the priority, it's still in the Immigration Act, by the way, that family reunification is a priority, but as a matter of policy, day to day, they keep changing the rules. I work for my constituents on immigration matters. I'd say the majority of my time working for my constituents over the last 4 years as a member of Parliament has been to help on immigration cases because the rules are arbitrary and constantly changing, and have turned away from the notion that we care about helping families have reunification here in Canada. We want new Canadians to move here to work, to make money, to pay taxes, to contribute to the community, and we want the new Canadians to have a predictable path to citizenship that includes bringing family members here. So our policy is very much in favor of immigration to Canada.
Okay. Conservative added a cap on family class, 5,000. Mr. Trudeau wants to increase that number to 10,000. But if you see these numbers get filled in first few weeks of the year, what do you think?
I think we should be looking at expanding immigration in Canada. We know that with an aging population, I'm part of that demographic referred to as the baby boomers. We are, at this point in Canada, we're going to have more Canadians over 65 than we have Canadians under 15. So we know as a matter of economic and societal reality that we need immigration to Canada. And therefore, I think we need to expand immigration. We need to continue to look at family reunification as a key priority. We believe the temporary foreign workers program should be completely replaced with one that invites workers here, but invites workers here with the goal of allowing them to stay. We need to make it easier for foreign students who are living in Canada who want to stay, who've already really incorporated themselves into Canadian culture. Students who've been here for 4 years of going to university who want to stay and get their master's degrees here, to continue to work and live in Canada, get their citizenship, and bring their family. We need to take all the different pathways to immigration, make them more predictable pathways to citizenship, and increase immigration, especially where we recognize that on our current demographics, we simply won't have enough of a young workforce to continue to maintain the health and prosperity of this wonderful country, which has always benefited from immigration.
Do you think Canada played a good role in Syrian refugee crisis?
In which, I'm sorry, in the Syrian refugee crisis? Oh,
That's
no,
right.
not at all. We have been, I have to say, I have a number of Syrian Canadians who live near my riding. They're not actually constituents, but they couldn't get their own MP to help them. So I've become very involved over the last, 3 years of working to try to help Syrian Canadian families in the most horrific nightmare situations. So let's just step back, if I can take it in two parts. Canada let down Syrians when we didn't do anything as it became clear that Bashar al-Assad was killing his own people in Syria. We didn't do anything as the civil war began to erupt. Now we have a situation where our intervention in Libya made things worse in the region. Libya is now a failed state, but on top of that, all the weapons that Muammar Gaddafi had in warehouses in Libya weren't guarded because we decided to acknowledge the rebel forces of Libya as the legitimate government of Libya, even though we knew, and I made this point on the floor of the House of Commons, we knew that within the forces that we were recognizing as the illegitimate government of Libya, there were al-Qaeda forces. So it's not a surprise then that the warehouses full of weapons and tanks and ground-to-air missiles that Muammar Gaddafi had have fallen into the hands of terrorists in Mali, in Nigeria, and yes, including ISIS. So now we're very concerned about ISIS because, I completely agree, they're brutal and sadistic, and because they're terrifying, they're a threat around the world, but particularly in that region. So now we're saying we're going to bomb, and we have a bombing mission. We have fighter jets in the region, bombing targets in Syria, hoping that somehow that will reduce the threat of ISIS. Well, of course, we're doing exactly what ISIS wanted. Recruitment to ISIS has gone way up because Western forces fell for the bait that ISIS laid for us by putting their horrific killings on YouTube. In the midst of this, we have Bashar al-Assad, a brutal dictator, who's killed 8 times more people than ISIS. And Bashar al-Assad has the support of Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Bashar al-Assad is being opposed by ISIS and al-Qaeda and al-Nusra. Neither of these factions, none of them, are forces that Canada would want to support. And in the midst of all this, now I come to the Syrian refugee crisis, we have innocent people, men, women, and children who want nothing to do with either Bashar al-Assad or ISIS, who are fleeing for their lives. More than 4 million in refugee camps in Jordan, in Turkey, and in Lebanon, and more trying to get out. We have failed the people of Syria in an egregious way. We did not send, I remember pleading with the Ministry of Immigration 3 years ago, that we should send naval vessels, that we should be prepared to rescue people from the ports, that we should do whatever we could to help people who are trying to flee the violence. Instead, we now find that after Stephen Harper promised that 10,000 Syrian refugees would be allowed to come to Canada, in fact, in this spring, they put a stop to processing refugees. They were in the House of Commons telling MPs, this is called misleading the House, and it is contempt of Parliament, that the Minister of Immigration and the Prime Minister were saying, we are processing refugees, we're doing the best we can. They knew, because they ordered the stop to processing refugees. They had put the brakes on processing refugees because they became concerned that they wanted to pick and choose which religions, which groups got let into Canada. The efforts at division between those of different religions in this country, I've never seen in certainly my lifetime. We've never had a prime minister willing to play to religious divides to try to create more fear and division. We are a lot of different religions in this country, and we are people who have no religion, some religion, different religions, but no one who presumes to be prime minister or who wants to be prime minister of this country should ever be encouraged in fanning the flames of religious division. We need to come together with respect and recognize that law of the land, Canadian law, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, gives each Canadian the right to practice their own religion. That's a fundamental right in a democracy, and we should never allow a political party in an election to try to create fear and division, particularly against new Canadians who have cultures and practices that may not be familiar to those of us who are part of basically European colonizers of a land that belongs to First Nations. This I have to say, this election, that's the ultimate low point for me, is a tip line for barbaric cultural practices. I think Stephen Harper and his cabinet should be ashamed. And I hope new Canadians will look at the other parties and realize that Canada requires tolerance, acceptance, and a warm welcome for new Canadians, including refugees.
Okay. Last election, Green Party won 1 seat. What number you're hoping this time?
More than one. my own seat. You know, there was for a very long time, Canadians were told, and even during the election, and right up till the day I won my seat, the pundits and the commentators in the media said that I couldn't possibly defeat a sitting cabinet minister. Gary Lunn was a sitting Conservative cabinet minister who'd been there for 14 years. And thanks to the people of Saanich Gulf Islands, I won my seat in Parliament. This time around, we have wonderful candidates, Claire Martin in North Vancouver, Gord Miller in Guelph, Bruce Heyer in Thunder Bay, Superior North, wonderful candidates on Vancouver Island and in downtown Vancouver, great candidates who will be great MPs. We have candidates in 336 ridings across Canada. This time around, I'm hoping that our strongest candidates in our strongest ridings will get the support they need to come to Ottawa with me. We'll work together and we'll support other parties and we'll work towards a more cooperative and respectful Parliament. So I'm certainly hoping for somewhere between 6 to 12 to 15 MPs, but honestly it's up to Canadians, and I just hope that between now and voting day on Monday, viewers who haven't made up your minds yet, please look at our platform at greenparty.ca and decide for yourself if you think you can trust us with your vote. If you do, we will be honored and we will work very hard.
Thank you for your time today and good luck with election.
Yes, good luck to us all, and I want to thank the Punjabi community for the extraordinary contribution that you make to Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you.